In 1815, Waterloo brought a lasting peace, but the next few years were just as difficult as the economy faltered when the stimulus of war spending was withdrawn and foreign competition revived. After 5 turbulent years, prosperity and stability returned just as the Regency was ending and the comparatively tranquil reign of George IV began. These events helped to shape the careers of some young men of this generation, most obviously the soldiers and sailors among them, while having little direct influence on the careers of others, including most clergymen and lawyers. Some of these men helped shape the events of the time, but a great many more were swept along by the tide, with little control or even a sense of where they were going, and it is these ordinary young men who are the primary subject of this book. Most of these young men were the sons of private gentlemen of independent means, or of men in the gentlemanly professions, clergymen, naval officers, and the like. In other words, the sons of men like Mr. Bennet, or of the Reverend Mr. Austen, Jane's father. However, the careers open to the younger sons of the aristocracy were generally much the same as those open to the sons of other gentlemen, and many of their experiences were very similar, so that the examples include the sons and brothers of earls and viscounts as well as of the gentry. This is not to deny that rank and fortune were very considerable advantages, although not as great as good connections within the profession, and we shall see how they were brought to bear. But the young men in any particular career were all running in the same race, even if some were given a head start. Not all the men whose experiences are discussed were younger sons, for some eldest sons embarked on a profession either from necessity, if their father was not wealthy, or from choice, and once they entered the race, the advantage of birth by itself counted for little. Equally, many members of all these professions were not the sons of gentlemen, but came from the middling classes, sons of shopkeepers and farmers, clerks and tradesmen, and they shared many of the same experiences as their colleagues. Nonetheless, this is predominantly a book about the well-born second son and his younger brothers, about the spares who never became heirs. It is also a book overwhelmingly about men. The challenges women faced were equally formidable but quite different and have been admirably explored in a number of scholarly works, including, most notably, Amanda Vickery's The Gentleman's Daughter. Women appear here largely as mothers and sisters, lovers and wives, and occasionally as patrons such as Lady Catherine de Bourgh, while some of Austen's other female characters also make appearances in order to shed light on social attitudes. But despite the relative absence of women from the text, I hope that the book illuminates the dilemmas they faced in marrying, what it meant to marry a young clergyman, naval officer or barrister, and also why there were so many young men of good family who were in no position to marry unless their intended had money of her own. Finally, it is a book about a world that was already beginning to change dramatically 200 years ago. Modern attitudes on many subjects, most obviously primogeniture and the place of women, are completely different from those even of the 1820s, let alone the 1780s. Listeners do not need me to point this out constantly, and will, I hope, take for granted that when I write, for example, of good families, I'm using the language of the time to convey the values of the time, not that this reflects my own outlook. In writing this study, I've been blessed by the abundance of entertaining and revealing accounts written at the time by the young men and members of their family, chiefly in the form of letters, diaries, and memoirs, which shed light on the progress of their careers. I've also drawn on the fiction of the period, most notably Jane Austen's novels, which sometimes spell out with great clarity the underlying assumptions of the age. Austen's own family is also a particularly good source of evidence. Whatever their private virtues and talents, her father and brothers were perfectly unremarkable in worldly terms. Their successes and failures were typical of men of their class, and they represent thousands of men with similar careers who are completely forgotten simply because they failed to provide themselves with a sister who wrote some of the finest novels in the language. I've also benefited from a great deal of excellent work by fellow historians on the social history of individual professions and on Regency society as a whole. Each chapter rests on foundations built by specialist books and articles, as well as the experiences of individuals conveyed through biographies and their letters and journals. I am greatly indebted to the work of these historians and editors, and one of the